Hello and welcome to another edition of Exploring with IUX, Express, Explain and Excite. And we are lucky to have two wonderful guests with us today from Oxford University Press. The topic of today's discussion is after education, the skills required for the future. And this is a topic that we've drawn actually from one of our guests' op-eds that she writes in Dawn, and we want to discuss it all about with her. So I'm going to bring her in right now. Our first guest is Neda Mulji, who works with OUP as a senior manager of professional development and is a fellow of the Higher Education Academy in the UK. And before joining OUP, Neda taught communication skills and English courses for several years in Dubai as university there. And prior to that, she was an EFL teacher in London. She has a degree from London's Goldsmiths University of London and a Cambridge Certificate of English Language Teaching for Adults. So she's eminently qualified, as well as a postgraduate certificate in higher education from Middlesex University. So, she knows her onions, as they say. Neda writes regularly, as I mentioned, for Dawn on topics in education, and has also authored a book on parenting titled The Love Connection. So without further ado, I am delighted to be bringing in friend Neda Mulji. Hello, Neda.
Hi, George. Thank you for having me.
Welcome.
And thanks for the introduction.
Welcome to Exploring with IUX. And our theme, as I mentioned, is after educations. Oh my goodness, I need to change that. Let me hide that and I will edit that right now. After education, it should say. That's not a, perhaps I need some after education skills for the future. And this was an article you wrote recently for Dawn, and I just wanted to for you to explain the thesis of your piece, really.
Yeah, so the premise of that article was that we have a young population between the ages of 15 and 29 out of jobs. The unemployment rate in that age bracket is a whopping 31.9%. I was sort of exploring the reasons for that unemployment rate, given that our job market is not saturated. We have tons of jobs available. The economy is churning. Why is it that our young people can't get jobs when they graduate from universities here, locally? But we hire those that graduate from abroad and come back looking for work. They get snapped up really quickly. So I was trying to figure out why that happens. And part of the reason is the skills gap. It's just that they can't match the skills that are required by their job. And so there's a whole host of skills that I wish our schools and our universities would develop in our students.
Okay, well, I will be touching on what those skills should be in a while, but let me introduce my second guest with us today. It is Shazia Asad, who has over 32 years of experience in education, and during these years she's worked as a teacher, an academic head, a co-curriculum strategist, and curriculum organizer in various schools. She's been working with Oxford University Press since 2007 as the editorial lead for mathematics, and she's dealing with the curriculum there and the syllabus details at OUP. And she's consulted on and edited various well-reputed mathematics series, and she also conducts teacher training workshops. So without further ado, I'm delighted to welcome Shazia. Hello, Shazia. Can you hear us? Shazia. Oops. Well, if Shazia can join later, we will bring her back in. So yes, you mentioned the skills. So what are some of those skills that we are missing out?
Well, there are plenty. There's a long list of skills that we're missing out on. If we look at the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals 4, which is quality education, within that we have a list of 30 things that we now need to focus on. Part of that is communication, oral and written communication. If you look at the way English is taught, or any other subject really, any other language rather, is taught more like a subject than a language. And so what happens is we don't end up developing the core language skills, the four core language skills of listening, speaking, reading, and writing. We end up just uh, teaching students to read and then moving on to writing very quickly. And so there's that big gap there. And then interpersonal skills follow. If there's a gap with listening and speaking skills, then interpersonal skills suffer. When interpersonal skills suffer, interview skills become a huge issue. So when our students go for interviews, they might even have the skill set, but they might not know um, how to showcase their skill set because of a gap in interpersonal skills. And so it's kind of like a vicious cycle or a chain of events rather.
But
Then
do you
there's
think do you so just on that point, do you think if they were speaking in their mother tongue, they would have that same problem?
no, because I think the mother tongue is also not taught as a language, it's taught as a subject here. So no matter which language you look at, I don't think the skills that need to be developed, the four core language skills, are being developed in the mother tongue either. They learn to speak the mother tongue as it's spoken at home and not necessarily as it's taught in a structured way. So it's not just about language, George. It's also about digital literacy, really, because now digitally the world has evolved really, really quickly. And I don't think our students can keep up with it at the rate that we're going at the moment. There's a huge need to upgrade skills very quickly. So, in terms of technical vocational training, or if you look at citizenship goals or citizenship ability, what does it mean to be a citizen? How do we contribute um, to our communities, to our country, or to the world as global citizens? All of that plays into the skills that we need to develop, skills that are missing in our children because our education, a formal education, has been so textbook oriented traditionally.
So, one thing you mentioned, and I found this phrase really interesting in your article, is you talked about a growth mindset. So, how do you develop a growth mindset, and what do you mean by that?
That's a very interesting question, and there is no easy answer to this. So, a growth mindset, in the traditional sense, means that you keep aiming for some kind of growth. So, there would be a vision involved, there would be structured goals involved, and there would be steps that take you towards those goals. And that structure kind of goes missing at universities. Some universities, I wouldn't say all, because there are some universities in Pakistan that are doing a fantastic job at developing a growth mindset in their students. The idea is to formulate some kind of plan, have some kind of vision for your future, and figure out how you can get there in terms of the steps that you need to follow. And sometimes it means working backwards from your goal to upgrade the skills that are needed to be there. Quite often what we do here as students is just get to the degree. Let's just get the degree and then we'll think about what we want to do next. But it doesn't work that way, because by the time we're done with the degree, it's already too late. So a growth mindset would be about planning, would be about having a vision, would be about um, learning to evolve very quickly. If one thing is not working, can we evolve very quickly and try another thing that we know will work or is worth trying? If the world changes around us, as it has in the last 2 years, can we quickly upgrade our skills and
Mm,
learn something entirely
mm.
new? So it's more about that willingness to evolve in different directions.
And why do you see that? Why do you think that's a barrier here in Pakistan? I mean, is that something to do with our our fear of change? Is it gender specific? Do you see that perhaps women are more prone to growing and evolving, and men are less prone, or is there any difference there at all?
It could be need-based, George. So when someone needs to get a degree very quickly, so he or she can start earning their bread and butter, the pressure is immense. That could be one reason why people stick to their original plan. Secondly, many individuals here, so many university-going students don't make their own decisions. Their decisions are made by their parents. And that becomes really tricky because they're not necessarily studying what they enjoy. So they're kind of part of a traditional setup that requires them to toe a particular path. And they might not have the skill set for it or interest in it. Another reason could be our fear of failure as a society. Do we really accept failure as part of life? Do we let students fail and change their path? And are we okay with it? How many parents would be okay with it? We have tons of parents who would expect their children to reap the investment that they've made in their university fees as quickly as possible. And these students not only have to pave their own path, they also have to start earning very quickly for their parents. So there's a whole lot of factors that come into play.
You mentioned universities earlier, and what can universities do for students above and beyond the basic curriculum requirements? I mean, how can we here engender those necessary skills?
Yeah, well, broadly speaking, there's lots that universities can do, starting with mentoring and coaching programs that students desperately need, because it's not just the subject and the exams that they've got to pass and the degree that they've got to acquire that matters. It's also that growth mindset that someone needs to help them steer from, and then steer towards, rather. And then there are students who go through very tough personal situations at university, and they might have the ability but not have the drive or the motivation to work hard given those difficult personal circumstances. It always helps to have a coach who can see you through that, who can help you through that. Then there are secondly, there are recruitment centers in place within universities abroad. Locally, we have some universities that are doing this really well, and they help students get job placements. So I'm not talking about job fairs where it's kind of like everyone comes and takes a dip in the pool, not that kind of stuff. It's specifically targeted to match a graduate's skill against jobs that are available in the market. And that matching thing in the recruitment process is really important for graduates. And when universities can do that for students, then they're sort of delivering on their promise to set them up in the world. So that's something they can do. They could also have, what I wrote in my article was that they can also have incubation centers in place where there are experts from industry guiding students on how to start their own business. And 80% of startups traditionally fail. But if they are overseen by somebody who's been there, done that, and guide the students, there's lots that can come out of it, especially through collaboration. If groups of students start a business together, I've seen this working very successfully in Amity University in Dubai, where I was teaching before. And students have done remarkably well through this incubation center, just making use of the talent available and the resources available there.
Great. I mean, one thing that we offer, and just to tell you, just to plug ourselves a little bit, Icrea University Extension is the sort of lifelong learning wing of Icrea University. And what we provide here are short-term certificates, diplomas, and even 2-year associate degrees. But it's providing those skills post-education, post-formal education that perhaps are required in order for students to access the necessary job that they are looking for. And so I think what we're seeing, because, as you mentioned earlier, that the world is changing at such a rapid rate, and formal education is often becoming redundant within 5 or 10 years after graduation, or what you've learned, you're constantly needing to update and upskill yourself, and that's what we provide here at IUX. How do we address the skills gap between what universities are teaching and what students need to learn from the competitive job market, apart from joining IUX? Is there anything else that you could recommend?
Yeah, I'd like to ask you that question about Icrea University. Actually, so what programs do you have in place that you think might help students when they enter the job market?
Well, McKinsey has written a report, and it talked about essentially, obviously, digital skills are very much the skills for the future, and then creative learning skills, lateral thinking, again, are very much skills for the future, and then leadership skills. And what we offer here at IUX is, obviously, we have a lot of digital related courses, whether it be digital marketing, coding, full stack development courses, et cetera, et cetera. But we also offer business communication skills, because what we've seen often with our students is that we have extremely talented students, and they perhaps have the hard knowledge in their subject areas. And what you were saying earlier is they lack often the communication skills in order to engage in a business environment, both locally here in Pakistan, but also internationally. And that hinders them. And there is a sort of cultural lag often as well. And so what we do is we provide skills-based training on communication for them in order for them to upskill them. I mean, I think also is the cultural barriers as well, because we are in Pakistan have a quite a hierarchical culture where we're very formally divided between seniors and juniors, and that's whether it be in the family structure or whether it be in the work life, and that is not very conducive to an international work environment where you have to be more collaborative, you have to work in teams, you can't just say Jisa, Jisa, Jisa to your boss, you have to provide your input because that's what they're paying you for. And likewise, as a team leader, you can't just scold and tell people what to do, you have to bring them with you. And I think those are the sort of active listening, those kind of skills are really important. Empathy, these are things that need to be taught because they will carry you far in the workplace.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned age barriers, because yes, I do feel if we can intermingle more freely with seniors and people who are much older than us, we end up, if we could collapse those barriers, especially at university level, we end up learning so much from them, because those are people who've tread certain paths that we might want to learn from. And yes, there is a lot to be said about mentorship as well. Now, mentoring skills do not mean that the leader or the senior or the expert from industry talks and the students listen. It's a fair exchange of ideas. And how do you know? You
Well,
mentioned.
absolutely. Yeah, it's a two-way learning process, because they will know more, and this is what I'm very much against in our setup. I don't want to be called sir. I want to be called by my name, because they're adults. I'm an adult. I might know some more things about certain aspects of life than they do, but they will know more things about certain aspects of life than I do. So it's a transactional learning relationship, not a one-way street.
It really is, yeah. And also, how would you know when someone is listening actively? You'd only know if they respond to what what you've said, if they've picked on some of the things, and if they have the ability to question it, even better, there's greater engagement there.
And that also is the basis of education, because it's testing, it's stress testing your own ideas, your own views. And if people can question it and challenge it, that actually allows your thoughts to be strengthened or perhaps changed, because you might learn something from a junior as well. And I think that's vitally important. Because
Absolutely.
again, the danger here is the ego kicks in, and it's like, how dare you question my views, or I'm the senior. And it's really something that I only ever experienced when I came to Pakistan. The idea of sort of, we talked about when I entered the media, it was, we talked about senior journalists and junior journalists. You don't talk about that in the UK. You talk about, you're a journalist, whether you're a 20-something journalist or a 60-something journalist, you're a journalist. And there aren't those hierarchies as much in a Western context. And I think whilst you obviously have to be respectful to people, and you are, but you can challenge the question. Okay, let's see if we can bring in some questions from people. Okay, we have Raja. What skills are needed to work abroad that are not taught here in Pakistan?
Okay, so I'm going to talk about global skills for a minute. So global skills is something that we've seen in the world before, and I haven't seen them taught here in Pakistani schools. We brought them now through the Oxford Teachers Academy, and we have these courses for teachers to learn how to bring global skills into the classroom. So you mentioned collaboration.
What are global skills? Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Yes. So it's the 4 C's of 21st century skills. You mentioned creativity and collaboration earlier. So there's creativity, there's collaboration, there's critical thinking, and there's communication. These are the 4 core global skills. Now they've been extended to include digital literacies, to include intercultural competence and citizenship, and the all-important emotional self-regulation and well-being. And so together, these clusters make up global skills. Now, that course has been very exciting for me to teach here, because our teachers have done this in some form or the other in the classroom. There's informal mentoring that many teachers do for the students, especially at primary level. And of course, actually, indeed, at every level, if you look at the teachers who are very ethical and very passionate about their teaching. However, I found during that course that they don't necessarily know how to structure their global skills teaching. And so these courses are really important for teachers, which is why professional development is really close to my heart. I feel it's so needed throughout the country, and it's kind of like unlocking potential. The potential is already there in some form of or the other. They're doing all of those things that our courses teach them. It's kind of unlocking a structured way of doing it. And our second course through the Oxford Teachers Academy is mentoring skills. So again, teachers are very good at mentoring students. They're very good at taking care of, nurturing students rather. But our mentoring skills course teaches them particular ways of making that support for students ongoing and sustainable in the classroom. So those are some of the skills that we need to work on here to answer your question, Raja.
But do you think there's a danger that Raja is thinking, I wish I'd been taught these in, and I presume Raja is not in primary school. I should have been taught this at primary level or secondary level, and perhaps it's too late for me to learn. I mean, can these skills be taught at higher education level?
These skills can be self-taught as well. Yeah, they can definitely be taught at higher education level, at any level rather, and they can be self-taught too. So I know people who, as adults, have dug deep into the skills required for their jobs and have upgraded themselves really quickly. And it's happened recently to so many teachers who are not tech savvy and had to get online to teach their students who they found suddenly that their students knew much more than they do. And so teachers were, under the threat of being left behind if they didn't very
Mm.
quickly upgrade their skills. And they've done that. They've taught themselves.
So do you think that sort of I presume this is because of COVID. Do you think COVID acted in many respects as a catalyst for digital skill advancement for certainly in the education sector?
Not just that, all the global skills clusters. So, just to let the audience know, these global skills clusters are nicely laid out in an Oxford University Press open access position paper published back in 2019 in the middle of COVID to address all those requirements that COVID had brought on. And COVID, I would think the pandemic addressed a lot of gaps that were already there, or sort of steered us towards addressing those gaps. Emotional self regulation and well being, for example, is really difficult to be taught at school level and university level as well, at all levels rather. And we didn't give enough attention to it, but now schools are sort of focusing on it much more in a more structured way. They have programs that they're offering either internally or through external centers and institutions. So it's really great to see that growth mindset coming into play, and it has to be at primary level and also at secondary level, because that is what is needed for students at university as well. Without the foundations, without the building blocks, it's very hard for university students to crack those exams, to understand what they're reading in those thick textbooks.
Yeah. We have another question. This was one from Mariam Fatima saying, I'm planning to apply abroad. What is the main skill I should have for applying abroad? Is there any particular skill you think that is required for studying abroad?
Inquiry-based reading. So we have inquiry-based learning in all our subjects in OUP books, but I find that this is not the kind of pedagogy that everyone in Pakistan has grown up with.
So
Fortunately,
could you teach me as a 5-year-old? I'm a 5-year-old. Explain to me like a 5-year-old, what is inquiry-based learning?
it's very simple in its basic form. When you read something, can you answer the 5W questions? Can you answer, what have I just read? Where is it located? Or what is it about? Uh, why have they written what they've written? So the 5Ws, the what, the when, the where, the who is it about, if there are any characters involved, and how can I use this information? How can this information answer the questions that I want to ask? And then you ask yourself, what questions can I ask based on the text in front of me? And that sort of helps you unravel texts. We have that in our OUP books. I don't see children doing that. And it's very alarming for me, because children read texts very passively. They're taught to read texts and look for particular answers to the questions that they're given at the end of the text in the form of exercise 1, exercise 2, exercise 3. And they do that mechanically, and they're really great at it because they've been taught the formula to crack. But then, if you have a character from a play or a novel and you sit down to have a conversation about that character, they can't give you anything of their own analysis other than what they've read about that character and taken literally from the text. So, if there's to go back to Mariam Fatma's question, reading is something that universities teach really well abroad. And by reading, I mean unraveling a text, exploring a text, getting the most out of a text, so that you know why you're learning what you're learning. You're not just learning it to take exams.
Yes. Yeah, it's not education for passing exams, it's education for education's sake. Zara has written saying, as a youth, I'm concerned that what skill sets are beneficial for our future in the AI world, since I belong to the design background. Yeah, I mean, this is a sort of an existential question, isn't it, really? Because I think a lot of people fear that their jobs will be, or their skills will be taken over by AI. And Zara looks like she's from the design world. So what should she be thinking about?
So, Zara, I would like to ask you what aspect of AI you're interested in, because it's such a vast field now. And I find it very exciting because there's a huge vision involved in what AI can do and cannot do. There's a world of possibilities within AI. So if you were to ask me, what skill set would I need? I think a vision more than anything else, to imagine where you can take design through AI. It's really about strategic ideas. It's really about thinking out of the box. It's about thinking what you can bring to the table or contribute to the world. What is unique about your work that no one else can do if you were to be replaced? Those are questions we need to be asking ourselves at the brink of graduation when we're going into the job market.
Okay. Sarah Hanif, to have a better career in future, what are the main skills? I think we've covered this, haven't we? We talked about the 4 C's. Is there anything else you want to mention to Sarah?
I just want to talk about interpersonal skills, Sarah, because we work in very large teams and we don't always work in person anymore. We work virtually with people across continents, across borders. And it's really important to have the interpersonal skills to be able to work with multiple people on multiple fronts. So I'm not talking about multitasking, which is not always a good thing, but usually people have multiple projects that they're taking care of. We no longer live in a world where we do one thing at a time. And so the skills that we need for that is really has to do with how we express ourselves quickly and how we manage the emotions of other people. So it's not only about, can I stop myself from reacting if someone ticks me off? It's not about that. It's sometimes about attuning yourself to another person's emotion, understanding another person's emotions as well. So human relationships, I think, are extremely important, whether we meet in person or virtually, and teamwork, collaborating with people. Those skills are something that you might want to work on for your career. I don't know where you are in your career.
How does, okay, so I understand the importance of being attuned to someone's emotions, and we all do it. If the boss is in a grumpy mood, we are aware, and we perhaps a little bit more hesitant to raise some subjects. But in the real world, how do you develop that? Because we talk about interpersonal skills, but actually, how do you learn that? Is it just, because it's not like you can read a textbook on it, can you? I mean, it's something that it's just either organic or ingrained in us, or how do you develop interpersonal skills?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. We have so many motivational speakers now, and there's a lot of open access material on the internet. There are lots of YouTube videos that teach you to do that in its very basic, form. I used to teach public speaking and presentation skills to my university students, and some of them were desperately shy and really didn't want to present in class. I didn't want to force them into it. So I used to ask them to go home and practice in front of the mirror with something very simple, not anything technical, something very simple like a favorite fruit. So if grapes is my favorite fruit, can I look in the mirror and give myself 8 reasons why I like grapes so much? And just talk to myself and keep talking until it becomes second nature. So practice makes things second nature as well. One other way of doing it is to just be brave, to have very open and authentic conversations with people. But then we also need to choose our words carefully, which is where the core language skills come into play. Not being
Yeah.
able to express ourselves clearly, precisely, and in an empathetic way can drive people away from us, can offend people as well. So yeah, so can we communicate sensitively with people and make our needs known, so we don't need to take a back seat and, what you were saying earlier, to do a G sir, and just take everything that comes our way. We can't do that, because if we do that, we don't shine. We've got to let ourselves speak for ourselves, and our work speak for us as well. So I think bravery has a lot to do with how we get on with people.
Yeah. Seema is asking, do you offer a communication course that could help university students?
We do, actually. So we taught a communication skills course last year here at Oxford University Press. We don't do
Can
this
I just
physically.
also say that IUX also offers a communication course
Oh, it's
as well?
amazing. Great
We're
job.
in competition.
Oh, that's fantastic. So we offered it to teachers, actually, and there was a lot of a lot of traction. And people wrote in to say, I need to help I need to help myself. I want this for myself. And some of them were women taking care of the houses, homemakers who wanted to join in the course. There were some university students that were interested. So we kind of opened it up to everyone. And we had about 200 participants on our online course. This was not assessed. People are also afraid of assessments. This course was not assessed. And I think we had you as a guest speaker on one of the sessions, George.
Yes, I think you did. Yes. And I didn't realize, I thought that was just for teachers. I didn't realize it was open to a wider audience as well. That's great. What else do we have? We have lots of questions, but let me get back to some of my questions. Let's see. How can public-private partnerships work to help our graduates find jobs? Is this anything that we can do to ensure jobs for for students?
Yeah, we can. So some of our universities, unfortunately, have been working in silos, publicly funded, and some of them have become ghost towns because of it. I would, now that's a bit of a generalization, but I have seen universities that had great potential back in the 60s and the 70s that have gone down in a bad way. So when I talk about public-private partnerships, I would suggest linking up with industry. So we have university students learning from guest speakers from various professions, and not just someone who's coming in for a one-off talk, but um, firms that can provide ongoing programs. So here we have at OUP, we have a graduate training program, as do many other multinationals in Pakistan. And that, I think, is really helpful for university students to get a flavor of what it's like to be in the workplace, to learn from real life examples, to be with people and yet not have the pressure of keeping a job. So they can dip in, learn, and dip out over 6 months. And so these are offered in terms of, so there are internships, there are apprenticeships, there's vocational training that can be offered, there's mentoring that can be offered through the industry to university students. There's a host of things, actually. There's lots to explore on that front.
This is a quote from your article, and it really stood out to me, and I just wanted you to expand on it a little bit. You wrote, just as students are expected to take ownership of learning, higher education institutes in Pakistan need to take on the ownership of teaching that prioritizes enablement. So how can we incentivize higher education institutions to do that?
Well, there are many ways of doing it, provided that they get it right. So when I say take ownership of teaching, I mean bring hardcore results to show that 80% of graduates have found job placements. 20% may have, dropped out of the workforce for any reason. Some leave the country. But these are statistics we do need to have. We need to publish these statistics. And higher education institutes will be able to attract a greater number of students if they can show what their students do after they receive their degree from the university. And there are various ways of showing that now on social media, on networking groups. The government could, well, when you talk about public universities, they should get a larger chunk of the pie if they're doing it right. And so greater funding for them. But private universities could get tax breaks in terms of, or any other benefit in terms of an incentivization package if they do this right. So if they can show that their student retention rate is above, let's just say, as an example, above 80%, and their job placements or workplace placements doesn't necessarily have to be a job, is above 80%. That is something that we can be proud of. At the moment, I see tons of universities churning out thousands and thousands of graduates who have no clue where they'll go and how they find a job, and that's quite alarming.
Well, this brings us to a question that Seema has mentioned: is how are placements at universities abroad different from university placements in Pakistan?
I guess we addressed this earlier, didn't we, with the internship programs and the vocational training, graduate training programs. Sometimes a graduate is given the choice of going to 4 or 5 different places before they choose one. Yeah,
Okay,
sorry.
let's assume that there's a students watching this who perhaps haven't had the mentorship or the support from their university. What advice would you give them in order to get the job that they want?
Right. So if they don't have that support from their university, what they would need to explore further is networking skills. So where can you show yourself? We call it a digital identity in today's world, where we can't go from place to place knocking on doors or making cold calls. We have the entire internet at our disposal to showcase our work. And so if you're into design and AI, as Zahra said earlier, it would be really helpful to find a way to showcase your work through blogs or participating in conferences. Be out there is what I'm saying. So we no longer have the option of sitting in a little studio at home or in a little room at home, plugging away and not showing ourselves, because there's something to be said about networking. It really does help to be part of a group, to be part of a fraternity, as it were, or a sorority, whichever way you want to look at it, belonging to groups, memberships of places, not necessarily monetarily, but belonging to groups of like-minded people who can help you get where you want to be. That's the important bit.
What one skill were you never taught that you wished you had been taught? Because you grew up in Pakistan, you went to university here, and then obviously went abroad for further studies. What one skill do you think, perhaps when you went abroad, do you think, oh God, why wasn't I taught that?
Conflict resolution. I was never taught conflict resolution. I wasn't taught conflict resolution at home, and I wasn't taught conflict resolution at school. But that is something I learned much later when I became a teacher, and I had to teach conflict resolution as part of my communication skills course at the university. And I saw my children learn conflict resolution in year 1 in their UK curriculum school in Dubai.
Could you give us a basic sort of rundown of what that means, conflict resolution? I mean, presumably, it sounds as though to stop conflict or reduce conflict potentially between students, is it, or between teachers and students, or between teachers and teachers, or is it just between people?
It's between people. So it's between two individuals. It could be at home, in a personal capacity, or it could be at the office in a professional capacity, anywhere really. Conflict between siblings. So conflict is a part of life. We face this multiple times a day with different people at different levels. It can get intense sometimes, or sometimes it's at a very basic level, but there is conflict all around us as long as people exist, as long as we coexist with people. And I really wish we had that integrated into our curriculum somehow, because students would do really well to learn very quickly how to resolve issues and still get on with people rather than shut shop and say, oh, I can't get on with so and so. It's not happening. We have a clash of personalities. There's a deadlock. I'm not doing this. That's when we give up, and that's when we lose potential because it affects us so deeply, especially when we're part of a team.
Yeah, absolutely. And what about leadership and teamwork? I mean, those obviously we mentioned were the skills for the future. Is that something that we can be? I'm just getting a sense from the sort of education that I've seen in Pakistan, where it's very much sort of teacher-led and teacher at the front of the classroom. How do we develop teamwork and sort of leadership skills in our education system?
So there's a lot changing now, George. When I go into schools, because I do teacher training myself, when I go into schools, and we do this a lot in, so my professional development team and myself, there's about 10 or 11 of us, and lots of freelance trainers as well who work with OUP. When we go into schools, we find quite often that group work, collaboration, creativity, thinking out of the box are skills already being addressed. We just help them structure ways of doing it. And so we see the landscape changing. There is a slow paradigm shift now. Why? Because the students are changing. They're not the same passive learners that perhaps we were. And I know I was. I can't speak for everyone, but
Why is that?
We were passive learners because we were in teacher-led classrooms. But a lot is changing in our country now, especially at the primary level. There's a lot that I've seen, in my experience as a teacher trainer with OUP. So that's a positive change. I like what I see, and when we have the right pedagogies embedded in the books, that kind of brings out the potential for everyone to work creatively and collaboratively as well. But if we talk in terms of leadership, I think leadership is really about the vision. It's really about the strategy of people. It has nothing to do with a person's position or where they are at school. It's not just a school management that can bring about change. It's every teacher in every classroom who can bring about change.
Great. Well, Neda, thank you very much. That was a very enlightening discussion, and I really enjoyed your piece. If you want to follow Neda, she's at Neda Mulji on Twitter, and she has a fortnightly column in Dawn, and she also works at Oxford University Press. Thank you so much for taking the time out today to speak to us about after education skills for the future. It was really good. Thank you.
Thank you, George. Thank you for having me.
And we will see more episodes of Exploring with IUX in the future. And see you until next time.